the dark world to our eyes, and to the eyes of many in the world of Hunter x Hunter. If you don't have enough Nen to embark on this adventure, then it's better not to even try. Few went and lived to tell the tale. It's the unknown that fascinates this universe. And a movie about this fascinating world right now would make total sense with the current manga, thus opening up space even for the anime's return. Want to know more about what's going to happen? Then stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and leave your like. The world of Hunter x Hunter has always been divided between what is visible and what is hidden, between what is understood and what is feared. And perhaps no other place represents this duality as well as the legendary Dark Continent. Mentioned with fear by the most influential people within the Hunter Association, feared even among the greatest minds in science and power, the Dark Continent is more than a place. It is a cruel reminder of human insignificance in the face of the unknown. To think of a possible movie about a past expedition to that forbidden land is like trying to give shape to terror. It's trying to look into the abyss and find meaning where there is only loss, despair, and a silence that swallows any hope. And yet, it's inevitable to imagine, what exactly happened during the first visits to that place? Who were the fools or brave ones who dared to cross the border of the known world? Why are records of these attempts nearly non-existent? And why has fear become an unchanging legacy across generations? The movie would start in cold tones, with a setting that recalls the backstage of the Hunter Association in a past era, maybe a few decades before the start of the main narrative. Names that today are only mentioned in records, in hidden notes from the V5 family, would emerge with force. The president at the time, a strict man but fascinated by breaking limits, would decide, after decades of silence, to assemble a secret expedition to the Dark Continent. This idea, as absurd as it seemed, would find support among the nations that now formed the V5, not out of courage, but out of greed. Stories about unexplored riches, about life forms never before seen, about plants that cure any disease, and beasts that challenge even the concept of Nen, all this would begin circulating in restricted circles in the darkest rooms of global decision-making. A new world promised a new beginning, or an absolute advantage over other powers. The chosen team would be composed of elite hunters, visionary scientists, and field agents with adaptive profiles. Among them, perhaps an ancestor of the Zodiacs, or even a distant relative of Beyond Netero, someone already contaminated by the hereditary obsession to go beyond. It would be during this first visit that the legacy of fear would be born. As they approached the Dark Continent, even protected by natural and technological barriers that were designed based on archaic theories, the first signs of disaster would begin to appear. The sea around them would change in density, as if something enormous were moving below, distorting the magnetic field, making compasses insane, making sounds disappear abnormally. The very weather would seem to react to human presence, as if the continent were alive, as if it refused to be invaded. But the step would be taken, the mistake would be made. And this movie, more than showing heroes, would show the birth of the pain that shaped an entire generation of hunters. Upon stepping on the Black Land, the reports would cease to be rational. The narrative would become almost poetic in its tragedy, blending diary entries written in trembling handwriting, videos corrupted by Nen interference, and testimonies fragmented by mental trauma. Some crew members would begin to show signs of Nen disintegration. Their aura would behave as if it had its own will, molding their personalities in reflection of the hostile environment. Others would simply disappear, as if swallowed by invisible rifts. The land, the air, the living beings, nothing there seemed to follow the laws that govern the known world. At a certain point, a new character would emerge, the chief biologist of the expedition, a man who had already studied ancient reports about calamities like Papu, the creature that turns love into madness, or Ai, the parasite that grants wishes in exchange for destruction. Perhaps he was the first to suspect that such entities were not legends, but echoes of the Dark Continent. His role in the film would not just be scientific, but emotional. He would represent the human dilemma of wanting to understand what should not be understood. In his notes, we would see the first signs of what would later become the 5 Threats warning system. He would give names and shapes to things that have no name, and by doing so, he would mark the destiny of humanity. The expedition would not end with a dramatic escape, nor with a final battle. It would end with a disturbing silence. Few would return. Most, even those who came back physically, would no longer be sane. Their bodies might carry mutations. Their minds would speak in languages no one would recognize. They would be immediately isolated, studied, and eventually silenced. The involved governments would bury everything. The project would be classified, and the Dark Continent would become a secret kept under 7 locks, under constant surveillance, not out of fear that someone might go in, but out of terror of what might come out. The film would then be divided between this past timeline and a present-day narrative. In parallel to the events of the expedition, we would see the effects of it in the current world. It would be shown how, somewhere in the Hunter Association library, a young Zodiac, maybe Periston or Cheadle still young, would find fragments of that old mission and begin to piece together the parts that were never told.
The timeline would then merge into a tragic cycle. The fear born in the past is about to resurface in the present, because everything that was buried one day comes back to the surface. And it wouldn't be an exaggeration. The legacy of the Dark Continent remains a shadow in the heart of the association. Beyond Netero himself, in his arrogance or thirst for knowledge, is merely resuming an obsession that is not his, but inherited. The original Netero, himself, Isaac, Beyond's father, had already led a mission there and returned with marks that he never wanted to talk about. Something that shaped his spirit and led him to seek increasingly extreme ways to become strong, not to defeat the Dark Continent, but to avoid being swallowed by it again. It's as if the great names of the world all in some way have a wound that started there, an unspoken trauma, a legacy of nightmares passed on through glances and scars. The great irony is that, even with all this, human greed did not disappear. On the contrary, it evolved. And in this possible film, that contradiction would become the central point. What is stronger, fear or the desire to control fear? The expedition of the past, as devastating as it was not enough to prevent others from being dreamed of, because there will always be someone willing to try. And it's in this space between madness and courage that the hunters live. Among the first names that could have participated in this legendary mission, one can speculate the presence of ancestors from influential families. Not only the Neteros, but maybe a forgotten member of the Zoldyck family, perhaps the first of them to have contact with something that would later shape the cold and ruthless nature of the family. Maybe Silva Zoldyck, still young, heard these stories from his grandfather and learned that death is not something to be feared, but the unknown is. Maybe even the Zoldyck's silent assassination style was inspired by the invisible predators of the Dark Continent, where there is no room for mistakes. The narrative would also bring to light mysterious figures that today are just footnotes, like the legendary Don Freaks, the author of the lost volumes of the New World Diary. Did he take part, or perhaps arrived before, alone, like a silent and forgotten explorer? His figure would become almost mythological, a shadow among shadows, a man who understood that the continent cannot be conquered, only visited and respected. His diary might be found at the end of the film as the last legacy of the truth, lost among black stones and roots that move like snakes. The film would have its climax not in an action scene, but in a revelation. We would discover that one of the expedition members didn't return just with wounds or trauma. They returned altered. Inside him, something sleeps, a fragment of the continent, perhaps an entity, and unknowingly, this person would become a vector, a bridge between the two worlds. The danger never ended, it only changed form. And at the end, when the credits start to roll, one last scene would appear in silence. A child playing near the sea, hearing a voice that no one else hears, looking towards the horizon, where the sky gets darker and the waves do not return. This film, even without answering all the questions, would definitively establish that the Dark Continent is not a future arc to be faced with brute force. It is a philosophical entity. It is the reflection of human curiosity taken to its limit. It is the warning that there are doors that should not be opened, but inevitably will be. Because deep down, that's what the world of Hunter x Hunter represents, the constant battle between what one wants to know and the price one is willing to pay for that knowledge. The past of the Dark Continent is not just a memory, it is a sleeping curse, and all indications are that it will awaken again. And this is the gateway to the current manga arc, where they are exactly heading to explore this continent, and that would be insane. The first steps and the current ones arriving in synchrony, manga and film, and after this entry, the return of the anime. Let's truly wait anxiously for these projects.